Lyra said. "Stay close, Novi," as she stepped toward the tall mirror that stood at the end of the dark hallway. The house was silent except for the faint hum behind the walls, and every shadow felt like it leaned in to listen. She lowered her head and whispered a sound so soft it barely existed, yet it rippled across the glass as if the mirror itself breathed it in. Novi felt the air tighten and watched the reflection shimmer, bending around their shapes as though someone else lurked behind the surface. Lyra stepped back, puzzled, certain she had spoken alone, but Novi heard a trembling reply whisper her name in a voice that was not Lyra's. The hallway lights flickered as Novi asked what had spoken, but Lyra only stared at the glass in fear, unable to answer as the mirror whispered again. Lyra guided Novi away from the mirror, but Novi kept glancing back as if the glass still murmured her name. Lyra's steps were quick yet careful, her instincts torn between fear and protection. The house hummed with its usual quiet systems, but tonight every vibration felt sharper, as though the walls were paying attention. Lyra tried to mask her worry by nuzzling Novi, yet the whisper replayed in her mind with a cold clarity she could not explain. Novi pressed close to her, trembling each time the distant lights flickered. Lyra wanted to tell her it had only been an echo, but the memory of that strange voice made her throat tighten. As they reached the living room doorway, Novi asked if the mirror could think. Lyra could not answer. The living room was warmer, but the comfort felt thin. Novi curled near Lyra, yet kept staring at the darkened hallway as though waiting for another whisper. Lyra listened to the steady hum of the house's main system, trying to understand what had happened. She sensed faint interference in her implant, like a memory that didn't belong to her flickering through its circuits. She tried to purr to calm Novi, but her voice wavered when she remembered the reflection tilting before her eyes. Novi asked whether reflections could lie, and Lyra wished she could say no. In the silence that followed, a soft vibration ran through the floor, as if the house had answered first. A faint chime sounded from the house system, and Lyra tensed as if recognizing something hidden beneath the tone. Novi lifted her head, ears flicking. The sound was simple, meant to indicate routine adjustments, yet tonight it carried a strange croak at the end, like a whisper crushed down to a heartbeat. Lyra stepped forward, scanning the walls as though expecting them to move. Novi stayed close behind her, pressing into her tail for reassurance. Lyra felt the weight of the earlier whisper tugging at her thoughts, urging her to return to the mirror, yet every instinct told her to keep Novi far from it. The system chimed again, softer this time, and the air felt colder. Novi edged toward the hallway again, drawn by the lingering sound she thought she heard. Lyra blocked her path, her body low and tense. She tried to speak softly, but fear coated her words and made Novi hesitate. The house lights dimmed for a second, plunging the room into darkness before returning with a muted glow. Novi asked if the whisper could follow them, and Lyra found herself staring at the shadowy doorway, unsure of the answer. Something in the air felt stretched thin, like a thread pulled to the point of snapping. As the house hummed again, a soft echo drifted from the hallway, too vague to understand yet far too close to ignore. Lyra paced along the living room edge, listening for changes in the house, calm as Novi crept toward the hallway again. Novi insisted she heard something breathing behind the mirror, but Lyra could not tell if it was fear speaking or something real echoing through the system. A thin vibration ran along the floorboards, making Lyra stop mid-step. The air smelled faintly metallic, as if the house had drawn in a long breath and held it. Novi stood beside her, trembling but curious, glancing repeatedly at the dim doorway. Lyra tried to steady her voice and said the mirror only replayed sounds the house caught. But the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. The hum shifted again, softer and strangely sorrowful, and Novi whispered that the reflection was waiting for them. Aaron entered the room with a tired sigh, unaware of the tension that wrapped around the walls. Novi rushed to her, brushing against her leg as though trying to pull her towards safety, but Aaron only smiled, thinking the kitten wanted attention. Lyra watched Aaron closely, trying to gauge whether she sensed the shift in the air. Aaron picked up her tablet and tapped through system logs, frowning at strange spikes in the hallway sensors. She muttered that the readings made no sense, But before Lyra could move closer, a faint crack echoed from the mirror. Erin paused, staring down the dark corridor, unsure whether she imagined it. Novi pressed closer to Lyra as the system lights blinked once, short and sharp, like a warning pulse. Later, when Erin stepped out to reset the router, Novi slipped back to the hallway before Lyra could stop her. The kitten sat at the edge of the mirror's dim reach, staring into the glass with a strange calm. Lyra hurried after her, whispering for her to stay away, but Novi only whispered back that she wanted to see if the reflection moved without them. Lyra hesitated, torn between fear and the growing need to understand what the mirror wanted. She stepped close enough to see her reflection stretch slightly, as though the glass tensioned around her outline like fabric pulled too tight. The lights dimmed and a faint sound rose from the mirror, not a whisper this time, but something like a question waiting to be answered. The sound from the mirror faded as Erin returned, carrying a small toolkit and muttering about the system acting strangely. She stopped when she noticed both cats frozen in the hallway. Lyra risked a low growl, hoping to nudge Novi backward, but Novi stayed rooted, watching the mirror with wide, unblinking eyes. Erin stepped closer and knelt beside them, confused by their behavior, and reached out to touch the mirror frame. The moment her fingers brushed it, the glass flashed with a brief reflection that did not match their positions. Erin recoiled, checking the surface, insisting it must have been a glitch. Novi whispered that the reflection moved first, and Lyra felt the weight of those words settle deep into her chest. Erin decided to run a full system diagnostic, leaving the cats near the hallway as she walked toward her workstation. Novi inched closer to Lyra, whispering that the mirror seemed to know when Erin was gone. Lyra kept her gaze locked on the glass, sensing a subtle hum beneath the surface, like a heartbeat on the other side. The lights flickered again, but this time the reflection did not mimic the change. Instead, the mirror stayed bright while the hallway dimmed around them. Novi pressed against Lyra, frightened, and asked if the mirror could see them better than they could see themselves. Lyra slowly stepped back, pulling Novi with her, as the mirror pulsed one last time before falling still. Novi returned to the mirror before sunrise, drawn by a quiet rhythm she claimed she could feel rather than hear. Lyra followed reluctantly, her senses sharpened by the memory of the distorted reflections. The house still hummed, but the tone had changed, now carrying a low tremor that made the walls feel hollow. Novi lifted her paw and tapped the glass, and the sound echoed longer than it should have, as though the mirror had swallowed it before letting it go. Lyra scolded her gently, yet her voice wavered when she noticed her reflection staring back a heartbeat late. The air thickened, carrying faint warmth from somewhere unseen. Novi whispered that the reflection felt awake, and Lyra felt her fur rise at the truth threaded between her words. As Novi leaned closer, a faint pulse ran through the floor, and Lyra felt the vibration beneath her paws like a hidden breath rising from the house's foundation. She guided Novi back. But Novi insisted the pulse wasn't frightening, only curious. The hum in the walls shifted again, forming a pattern almost like a soft rhythm matching Nova's heartbeat. Lyra tried to stay calm, yet her implant buzzed lightly, filling her head with blurred fragments like memories she never lived. She pressed against Novi to stop her from returning to the glass, but the kitten's wide eyes stayed fixed on the reflection, which seemed brighter near her outline. Lyra whispered for her to look away, though she feared it was already too late. The hum from the walls rose and fell like a slow breath, and Lyra realized the house's AI was rerouting signals through the mirror's frame. She felt a surge in her implant, a brief spike that blurred her vision with flickers of distant places she didn't recognize. Novi stepped back, sensing Lyra's distress, and asked whether the house was trying to speak to them. Lyra steadied herself, forcing her senses to focus, but the echoes in her mind lingered like soft scratches against her thoughts. She told Novi they needed to stay away from the mirror until Erin fixed the system. Yet as she spoke, A faint warmth spilled from the glass, as though someone inside it leaned close to listen. Erin returned after checking the central AI hub, and found both cats frozen near the mirror again. She scolded them lightly, thinking they were playing, but her voice trailed off when she saw the glow around the frame. She stepped closer, puzzled, and tapped the glass. The reflection of her hand appeared half a second before she touched the mirror, making her jerk her arm back sharply. Lyra positioned herself between Erin and Novi, anxious and defensive. Erin muttered about sensor feedback loops, yet her tone carried an edge of fear she attempted to hide. The house hummed again, rising in pitch, and Novi whispered that it seemed like the house was listening to all of them at once. Later, when the house settled into a quieter hum, Lyra guided Novi back to the living room. Novi hesitated, glancing over her shoulder at the hallway, as though afraid the reflection would follow. Lyra pressed close to her and tried to reassure her with a steady purr, though her own thoughts churned with unease. The strange flickers through her implant lingered like misplaced memories humming beneath her mind. Novi finally curled beside her, whispering that she didn't think the mirror wanted to harm them, only speak. Lyra swallowed her rising dread, wondering why she felt the opposite. The house grew silent, unusually so, and Lyra realized silence could be more frightening than the whisper that started it all. The house felt colder by evening, as though every wall had retreated from the warmth it once held. Lyra watched Novi pace near the living room entrance, unable to relax, her ears tilting at each faint twitch of the walls. The earlier hum had vanished, leaving an unsettling stillness that pressed into the air. Lyra tried to reassure her, but a sudden flicker of heat shot through her implant, making her vision blur with a flash of the mirror showing Lyra's own face, twisted in fear. She blinked hard, unable to tell if it had been a glitch or a warning. Novi asked why the mirror showed things that hadn't happened yet, and Lyra could only nudge her close, torn between protecting her and facing the truth forming quietly in her thoughts. Something inside the house was shifting again, waiting for them to step closer. The hum returned, but now it carried a trembling pitch that crawled across the floor like distant thunder. Lyra tensed, feeling the resonance through her implant, and Novi pressed against her for comfort. Erin entered the room quickly, confused by this sudden system spike she saw on her monitors. She knelt beside the cats, asking if something had frightened them, but before Lyra could react, the hallway lights flickered once, then went completely dark. The silence that followed was sharp, almost painful, before the mirror emitted a soft, muffled sound like a distant cry. Erin stood abruptly, staring into the darkness with wide eyes, unsure whether she heard the sound or imagined it. Novi whispered that the mirror felt sad, and Lyra felt the truth of it sink into her bones. Erin stepped toward the hallway slowly, calling out to confirm if the system had malfunctioned. Lyra followed her, nudging Novi back when she tried to come along. A soft whisper drifted from the mirror, too soft to form words yet heavy with emotion. Erin reached the edge of the darkness and tapped her wristband to activate manual lighting, but the system refused to respond. Lyra felt a wave of heat pulse through her implant, and for a moment she saw the reflection of Erin falling backward, though Erin still stood beside her unharmed. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving Lyra shaken. Novi begged to know what she had seen, but Lyra couldn't speak past the tightness in her chest. The mirror flickered again as though straining to reveal something trapped inside. The hum rose without warning into a sharp whine that made Novi cry out and flatten against the floor. Lyra shielded her, ignoring the sudden burn in her implant as the sound peaked. Erin reached for the control panel on the wall, struggling to override the system. The whine dropped instantly into a deep rumble, and the mirror flashed with a distorted reflection of the hallway tilting sideways. Lyra felt the air compress around them, heavy and unstable, and Novi whispered that something inside the mirror was afraid. Erin shouted that the system was looping signals, but her voice shook with fear as she fought to regain control. The mirror flickered again, and for a split second, Lyra saw her own reflected shape, trembling as though bracing for impact. The rumble faded as suddenly as it began, leaving the house in a thick, unnatural quiet. Erin sagged against the wall, exhausted, muttering that she needed to shut down the system before something worse happened. Novi crawled to Lyra and buried herself beneath her chest, shaking. Lyra felt the last wave of heat drain from her implant, leaving her mind clearer but full of unease. She looked toward the mirror, now dim and unmoving, yet holding a lingering sense of dread as though it carried a warning too faint to hear. Novi whispered that the mirror showed Lyra afraid, and Lyra felt the weight of that truth settle over her like a cold shadow. The silence deepened, heavy with the sense that something inside the reflection was preparing for a harder truth to come. The house remained still long after Erin shut down most of the system, but the silence felt heavier than before, as if the walls held their breath. Lyra stayed close to Novi, sensing her kitten's worry deepening with each passing minute. Novi whispered that the mirror hadn't been trying to frighten them, only to warn them, but Lyra didn't know how to answer. Her implant flickered weakly, sending small pulses that tugged at memories she didn't recognize. When she blinked, she saw flashes of Novi standing alone in the mirror's reflection, older, frightened, calling for help. Lyra shook off the vision, unsure if it was real or a malfunction. Novi asked if the mirror could show the future, and Lyra felt the question settle into her bones, like a truth she didn't want to understand. The quiet deepened, as though waiting for her to accept it. Erin returned to the hallway with tools in hand, determined to fully disconnect the reflective sensors. Lyra followed reluctantly, feeling a strange tug in her implant that urged her to stay close. Novi trailed behind them, whispering that something inside the mirror felt restless. Erin knelt by the frame and began unscrewing the base panel, muttering about feedback loops. Before she could pull it open, the mirror flickered to life, glowing with a warmth that didn't match the power state of the house. Lyra stepped forward, drawn to the glow despite her fear, and glimpsed her reflection tilted again. But this time, her reflected form shook its head slowly, as if warning her away. Lyra froze with a chill running down her spine. Novi whispered that the reflection was trying to speak. The glow softened, and the reflection steadied into a clear image. Lyra stared into it, feeling an ache spread through her chest as she saw herself standing beside Novi, but with a look of fear she had never shown before. Novi stepped closer and whispered that the reflection was showing them something that hadn't happened yet. Erin reached out to touch the frame and felt a sharp static jolt. Pulling her hand back quickly, Lyra leaned closer, and another flash filled her vision, this time showing Novi crying while the house thundered around her. The soundless vision faded, leaving Lyra trembling. She realized the mirror wasn't malfunctioning. It was responding to them, forming echoes from possibilities the house registered deep within its systems. Novi pressed against her, asking whether the mirror showed the future or only fear. Lyra wished she knew. Lyra stepped back, overwhelmed by the visions pouring from the mirror. Novi followed, her small voice trembling as she asked if the future could be changed. Erin stared at the glass, confused and increasingly afraid, trying to make sense of a system that should be capable of such images. The mirror pulsed once, then dimmed to a pale reflection, as though waiting for a choice to be made. Lyra felt her implant surge again, filling her head with faint echoes of Novi crying her name. She steadied herself, refusing to accept the fear tightening inside her. Novi whispered that the mirror didn't want to hurt them, only warn them. Lyra nudged her gently, torn between trusting her kitten's instinct and shielding her from further danger. A faint vibration trembled through the tiles, signaling another shift deep within the house. Novi sat down beside Lyra, trembling but trying to be brave. Lyra wrapped herself around her protectively, listening to the fading hum slipping through the walls. Erin wiped her forehead, visibly shaken as she admitted she had no idea how the system could generate such images. Lyra lowered her head, sensing that the visions came not from malfunction, but from the house reading the emotional threads between her and Novi. Novi whispered that the mirror wanted them to stay together, no matter what future it had shown. Lyra felt tears forming behind her eyes, though she didn't understand why. The mirror dimmed completely, leaving only its cold reflection. The silence left behind felt like a warning and a plea, wrapped into one unspoken truth. A storm rolled in without warning, shaking the windows as if the sky itself had joined the tension building inside the house. Lyra crouched beside Novi while Erin worked frantically at her workstation, trying to shut down the last active circuit connected to the mirror. Lightning flashed, and moments later the mirror brightened with a sickening glow, as though charged by the storm's energy. Lyra felt a violent jolt pulse through her implant, sending her stumbling as images flooded her vision. Novi, trapped inside the reflection, calling silently for help, while the house thrashed around her. Lyra cried out, and Novi ran to her, begging to know what she saw. Erin shouted that the system was overloading, and as she reached for the power cutoff, the mirror pulsed again, stronger, drawing the room's air toward it in a low swell that felt like a breath ready to drag something inward. The lights flickered as the storm intensified, and a deep rumble rolled through the floor. Novi crept toward the hallway, drawn by a whisper she insisted wasn't frightening this time, only urgent. Lyra tried to pull her back, but another surge ran through her implant, forcing her to pause as painful static clouded her mind. Novi slipped forward and reached the edge of the mirror's glow. The reflection blinked a moment too late, then shifted into a version of Novi standing alone. Erin shouted for her to stop, but the house shook violently, sending a cascade of sparks from the exposed wiring. The mirror swelled with a sudden flash, pulling at Nova's whiskers like a gust of wind reversed. Lyra lunged with a cry, feeling the world tilt as the reflection reached outward with a silent grasp. Novi cried out, not in fear but in shock, as the mirror's pull dragged her paws closer to the surface. Lyra lunged again, ignoring the screaming pain in her implant, and caught Novi by the scruff just as her reflection's outline began to merge with the glass. Erin slammed her hand onto the emergency override, sending a burst of static through the house. The mirror flickered violently, its glow twisting into sharp fractures. Lyra felt a crushing pressure in her head as her implant overloaded, pouring visions through her mind. Novi lost in the mirrored future, calling for her again and again. Lyra tightened her grip, refusing to let the vision become real. Novi whimpered that she heard someone inside the mirror crying. The house dimmed as Erin rerouted power, and the pull weakened, but not enough to stop what was coming. Erin managed to force the system into partial shutdown, but the mirror refused to dim completely. Instead, it flickered with rapid pulses that made the entire hallway flash like a beating heart. Lyra felt her implant stretch beyond its limits, sending painful heat through her spine. But she moved anyway, positioning herself between Novi and the mirror. Novi begged her not to go closer, but Lyra sensed that only she could break the connection now. The mirror shimmered, showing her a terrible possibility. Novi alone in the future, crying into silence. But Lyra forced herself to stare it down. Erin shouted that the system was seconds from total overload. Lyra stepped forward, guided not by fear but by the fierce instinct that no future could separate her from her kitten. The mirror screamed with a silent burst of light, and everything shook. Lyra felt her implant surge with raw energy as she threw her weight against the pull, shielding Novi completely. Erin yanked the final power conduit free, and the house plunged into near darkness. For a moment, the mirror held its glow, lifting dust and air as though inhaling one last time. Lyra's vision filled with shadows of possible futures collapsing into each other, all centered on Novi standing alone. With a desperate cry, she pushed her failing implant past its limits. The mirror fractured from within, its glow shattering into a cascade of dimming shards. The pulse stopped. Novi rushed to Lyra, trembling as the last whisper faded from the glass. Lyra collapsed gently into her kitten's embrace as the storm outside began to quiet. Morning light slipped gently into the house, settling over the broken mirror like a soft curtain. Lyra lay beside Novi, exhausted yet relieved. her implant quiet for the first time in days. Novi slept pressed against her chest, trembling faintly each time thunder rumbled far in the distance. Aaron moved cautiously through the hallway, inspecting the fractured surface with a mixture of fear and disbelief, muttering that nothing in the system should have been capable of what happened. Lyra watched her quietly, trying not to relive the terrible moment when the mirror tried to take Novi away. The house hummed with a softer tone now, almost peaceful, though Lyra sensed traces of the old echoes hiding beneath it. Novi stirred, whispering that she heard nothing this morning. Lyra hoped it would stay that way. Aaron spent hours shutting down the remaining power lines connected to the reflective conduits. Lyra stayed nearby, watching the process with cautious attention, while Novi wandered the room in slow, uncertain steps. The house felt lighter, its hum steady and quiet, but the memory of the mirror's pull lingered like a bruise beneath the silence. Lyra approached the fractured frame, staring into the dull shards that once shimmered with impossible futures. She saw only her reflection now, calm and unbroken, and felt a strange relief mixed with fear of what might still linger unseen. Novi pressed herself against Lyra and whispered that the mirror wasn't trying to hurt them. Lyra didn't answer. She simply nuzzled her kitten, grateful the reflection no longer whispered her name. Throughout the afternoon, the house settled into an unfamiliar calm. Lyra curled beside Novi, while Aaron cleaned debris from the hallway. Novi asked again whether the mirror had really shown the future or only their fears, but Lyra could not give her an answer. Instead, she listened to the house's new hum. Steady, gentle, lacking the eerie tremble that once traveled through the walls. The silence felt safer, though a small part of her remained alert, wary of any shift in tone. Novi nestled closer, whispering that she didn't hear any voices now. Lyra pressed her nose into the kitten's fur, relieved, yet haunted by the memory of Novi's reflection calling for help. She hoped the silence meant the danger had passed, not that it was holding its breath. By evening, Aaron had removed the last shard of the mirror, leaving only an empty frame against the wall. Novi watched from a distance, her tail flicking softly, as though expecting something to move inside the vacant space. Lyra approached the frame cautiously, remembering the glow that once pulsed from its depths. Now it was lifeless, a hollow outline of what had nearly stolen her kitten away. Novi whispered that she still felt something faint behind the wall, a soft memory of the voice that once spoke her name. Lyra pressed against her gently and told her to stay close tonight. The house hummed with a sound almost like a sigh, and Lyra wondered whether it was mourning the silence or relieved by it. Night settled in gentle and quiet, a rare peace after days of fear. Lyra curled around Novi, grateful for the warmth of her kitten's steady breathing. The empty frame in the hallway remained still, carrying no glow, no hum, no whisper. Aaron checked the system one final time, confirming the reflective circuitry was completely disconnected. Lyra felt her implant settle into a silent, neutral state, no longer tugged by unseen futures or echoes. Novi whispered that she hoped the mirror was finally asleep. Lyra nuzzled her gently, believing it to be true, yet unable to ignore the tiny shiver that ran through her when she glanced toward the hallway. As she closed her eyes, a faint vibration hummed deep within the house. A last, nearly inaudible whisper neither cat heard.